The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty attic window of the old Victorian house in Charleston, South Carolina, casting long shadows across forgotten boxes and furniture draped in white sheets. Maya Richardson wiped the sweat from her forehead, leaving a smudge of dust across her dark skin. At 32 years old, she had returned to her grandmother's house for the first time in years, not for a pleasant visit, but to sort through decades of accumulated memories after her grandmother Loretta had passed away 3 weeks earlier. The August heat was oppressive, making the cramped attic feel like an oven. Each breath felt heavy with humidity and the scent of old paper and mothballs. Maya paused to pull her long braids into a ponytail, trying to cool the back of her neck. Through the window, she could see the live oak trees draped with Spanish moss, their branches swaying gently in a breeze that didn't quite reach the stifling attic. Her younger brother, Derek, had promised to help but had called that morning with an excuse about work. She wasn't surprised. Derek had always been the one to avoid difficult emotions, while Maya faced them head-on. Their relationship had been strained since their grandmother's funeral, where Derek had barely spoken, standing rigid at the graveside while Maya had openly wept. Grief affected people differently, Maya reminded herself, but it still stung that she was doing this alone. She pulled another box toward her, this one made of weathered cardboard that crumbled slightly at her touch. The box was labeled in her grandmother's shaky handwriting, "Important family papers." Maya's heart squeezed. Loretta had been 93 when she died, her mind sharp until the very end. She had lived through so much history, witnessed so much change, and had always been the family's anchor, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, who hosted Thanksgiving dinners that brought together cousins from 3 states, who kept the family tree updated in a massive leather-bound book. Inside the box, Maya found old letters, yellowed newspaper clippings announcing births and deaths and marriages, and beneath layers of tissue paper that fell apart at her touch, a collection of photographs in ornate frames. Her grandmother had been the family historian, the keeper of stories that stretched back generations. Maya had heard some of these stories as a child, sitting at Loretta's feet while the old woman's hands worked on quilting or shelling peas. Stories about ancestors who had survived impossible times, who had built something from nothing, who had kept the family together when everything tried to tear them apart. Stories about courage and sacrifice and resilience. But Maya had been young then, more interested in playing outside than listening to old tales. Now, holding these remnants of the past, she felt a deep regret for not paying closer attention, for not asking more questions while she still had the chance. The first few photographs showed familiar faces. Her great-grandparents on their wedding day in 1927, standing stiffly in formal clothes, their expressions serious but their hands clasped together showing affection. Her grandfather as a young soldier before he shipped off to World War II, his uniform crisp and new, his face unlined by the horrors he would witness. A faded color photo from the 1960s showing her grandmother as a young woman, stunning in a yellow dress, standing in front of a church with sunlight making her skin glow. Maya smiled, setting each one aside carefully, making mental notes about which relatives to contact to share copies. These were treasures, windows into lives lived fully despite obstacles. Then her fingers touched a frame that felt different. Heavier. Older. The wood was dark walnut, intricately carved with patterns that spoke of craftsmanship from another era, the kind of detailed work done by hand with simple tools and infinite patience. She lifted it from the box, and her breath caught. The photograph inside was unlike the others. It was older, much older, printed on thick paper that had yellowed with age but remained remarkably intact. The image showed a family of 7 people. A man and woman, appearing to be in their 40s, sat in the center on simple wooden chairs. Around them stood 3 younger adults, probably in their 20s, and 2 children, maybe 10 and 12 years old. They were dressed in their finest clothes, the kind people wore for special occasions in the 1800s. The man wore a dark suit with a high collar and a watch chain visible across his vest. The woman's dress was simple but elegant, with buttons running up to her neck and sleeves that covered her arms completely. The younger adults wore similar formal attire, the women in long dresses with modest necklines, the man in a suit slightly less formal than his father's. Everyone looked directly at the camera with serious expressions, as was common in photographs from that era when people had to remain still for long exposures and smiling was considered undignified for formal portraits. But what struck Maya most was the clarity of their faces, the dignity in their postures, the way they seemed to command respect even through the veil of time. Their eyes were sharp and intelligent. Their shoulders were straight. They looked like people who knew their worth, who had overcome tremendous obstacles to be sitting there having their photograph taken. These were her ancestors. She knew it in her bones, felt it in the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat, in the way tears pricked unexpectedly at her eyes. Maya carried the photograph to the window where the light was better. She studied each face, trying to imagine their lives, their hopes, their struggles. The woman in the center had eyes that reminded her of her grandmother, a certain strength mixed with warmth, a look that said she had seen hardship but refused to be broken by it. The man beside her had strong hands, calloused and capable, resting on his knees. A working man who had built something with those hands. As she examined the image more closely, Maya noticed something odd. Behind the family, on the wall of what appeared to be a simple wooden home, there was something hanging. It was rectangular, like a piece of paper or document, but the image wasn't quite clear enough to make out details. She squinted, bringing the photograph closer to her face. There appeared to be text on it, formal script written in the style of official documents, and what might have been an official seal or stamp in the corner. The document had been positioned deliberately, Maya realized. It wasn't just hanging there randomly. It was placed where it would be visible in the photograph, at a height where the camera would capture it clearly. Maya felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, holding it at an angle to the photograph. The additional light revealed more detail. The document on the wall definitely had writing on it, formal script that looked official and important. She could make out a few words at the top, something that looked like certificate or possibly deed. Her heart began to race. This wasn't just a family portrait. This was something more, something deliberate. She needed better equipment to see this properly, to understand what her ancestors had been trying to preserve. Maya carefully removed the photograph from its frame, her hands trembling slightly. On the back, in faded ink that had turned brown with age, someone had written in elegant cursive, "The Richardson family, Charleston, South Carolina, October 1868. Below that, in different handwriting, newer but still old, probably added decades later by another generation, Grandmother Sarah, Grandfather Moses, Uncle James, Aunt Ruth, Uncle Thomas, and the twins, Elizabeth and Samuel. The first photograph after freedom. Maya's hands trembled as she read those last four words again. After freedom. 1868. Just 3 years after the Civil War ended. Just 3 years after the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment made slavery illegal. Her ancestors, newly free, had scraped together the money to hire a photographer to document their family. In an era when most formerly enslaved people struggled just to eat, to find shelter, to stay alive, her family had invested in a photograph. The significance of that act, the courage and hope it represented, the statement it made about their determination to be remembered as full human beings, overwhelmed her. Tears spilled down her cheeks, leaving tracks in the dust on her face. Maya pulled out her phone and called her brother. Derek answered on the fourth ring, traffic noise in the background and voices of coworkers in the distance. "Hey, sis, I'm really sorry about today, but this project at work is killing me and my boss said if I don't get this presentation done by tomorrow." "Derek, I found something," Maya interrupted, her voice tight with excitement and emotion. "In Grandma's attic. A photograph from 1868. Our family, Derek. Our direct ancestors. 7 of them, all together, and there's something in the photograph, something on the wall behind them." There was a pause. Maya could hear Derek moving away from the noise, probably stepping into a hallway or empty office. 1868? That's right after, I know. Right after emancipation. And there's something in the photograph. A document on the wall behind them. I can't quite make out what it says, but it looks important. Important enough that they made sure it was in the picture, positioned where the camera would see it clearly. "What do you think it is?" Derek's voice had changed, the distraction gone, replaced by genuine interest. Maya stared at the image again, her mind racing with possibilities. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Do you remember Grandma ever mentioning anything about this? About an old document or certificate? About the family right after the Civil War? Derek was quiet for a moment, thinking. Maya could hear him breathing, could imagine him running his hand over his face the way he did when concentrating. She used to talk about how the family owned land early on, how they managed to hold on to it when a lot of other black families lost everything during Reconstruction. She said there was proof somewhere, documentation that we came from people who were smart enough to protect what was theirs. She'd get this look in her eye when she talked about it, like it was really important to her that we knew. This might be that proof, Maya said softly. I need to get this photograph enhanced or digitized or something. I need to see what that document says. There's writing on it, official-looking script, maybe a seal. There's a guy I know, Derek said, his interest clearly piqued now, his earlier work excuses forgotten. Works at the university in the history department. Dr. Marcus Webb. He specializes in African American history, particularly in the South during and after Reconstruction. They have equipment for restoring and analyzing old photographs and documents. High-tech stuff that can pull details out of images that look unclear to the naked eye. Want me to reach out? As soon as possible. Today if you can. Maya carefully placed the photograph back in its frame and continued searching through the box. Beneath more tissue paper, she found a small leather journal, its pages brittle with age and its cover worn smooth by years of handling. She opened it carefully, afraid the pages might crumble. The same elegant handwriting from the back of the photograph filled the pages, written in ink that had faded to a brownish color but remained legible. This was someone's diary, a first-person account from that era. Her pulse quickened as she began to read the first entry, dated November 1868, just a month after the photograph had been taken. Today we received the photograph from Mr. Henderson. Moses insisted we include the deed in the picture. He said future generations need to know what we built, what we protected. Sarah cried when she saw how fine we all looked. Free people, property owners, a family with a name and a future. James said we should make copies, send them to relatives who moved north. But Moses said no, this one stays with us, in our house, proof of what we accomplished. Maya's vision blurred with tears. She sat down on an old trunk, clutching the journal to her chest. This was more than just a photograph. This was a deliberate act of preservation, a message sent across time. Her ancestors had known how fragile their newfound freedom was, how easily things could be lost or forgotten or stolen. They had documented not just their faces, but their achievements, their legal claim to something permanent in an uncertain world. The deed. That's what the document was. A property deed, proof that they owned land. She spent the next 2 hours reading through the journal, completely losing track of time as she was transported back to 1868. It belonged to Ruth, one of the daughters in the photograph. Ruth wrote about daily life, about planting crops and going to the newly established school for black children. She wrote about the joy of learning to read and write, about how she practiced her letters every night by candlelight. She wrote about tensions in the community, about night riders who threatened families who seemed to be doing too well, who were buying land or opening businesses or sending their children to school. She wrote about her father Moses's determination to protect the 40 acres they had managed to purchase, and about the lawyer in town who had helped them ensure the deed was properly recorded despite attempts by hostile officials to prevent it or lose the paperwork. Mr. Caldwell came by today. One entry read. He said there are men in the county office who would gladly see our deed disappear into thin air. He advised Father to keep multiple copies, to have it witnessed and notarized and photographed if possible. Father took his advice seriously. Mr. Caldwell is a good man, one of the few white men in Charleston who seems to believe we deserve the same rights as everyone else. As the sun began to set, casting orange light through the attic window and making the dust motes dance in the air, Maya understood something crucial. That photograph wasn't just a family portrait. It was evidence. It was protection. It was a declaration. By making sure the deed was visible in the image, her ancestors had created a record that couldn't easily be destroyed or denied. If someone tried to claim they never owned that land, here was proof, dated and preserved, showing the deed hanging proudly on their wall. If the courthouse records were destroyed, which happened frequently in that era through fires both accidental and deliberate, the photograph would still exist as backup evidence. Maya carefully gathered the photograph and journal, along with several other documents from the box that looked related. She needed to research more about land ownership in Charleston during Reconstruction. She needed to understand the full context of what her family had achieved and what obstacles they had overcome. And most importantly, she needed to find out if that land still existed, and if so, what had happened to it over the past 157 years. As she climbed down the attic stairs, the weight of history felt both heavy and exhilarating. Her grandmother had spent her life preserving these stories, waiting for someone in the next generation to care enough to listen, to ask questions, to dig deeper. Maya had come to this house expecting to sort through junk and memories, to perhaps cry over old photographs and then donate most of it to Goodwill. Instead, she had found a mystery that connected directly to who she was and where she came from, a story of courage and intelligence and determination that deserved to be told. That night, in her hotel room a few miles from her grandmother's house, Maya spread the documents across the bed and began making notes in a spiral notebook. She photographed every page of Ruth's journal with her phone, making sure to capture the details clearly, adjusting the lighting and angle to avoid shadows. She researched photographers in Charleston in 1868 and found references to several who had studios serving the black community. One name kept appearing, Robert Henderson, described in one article as a free black photographer who documented the newly emancipated community with dignity and artistic skill. That had to be the Henderson mentioned in Ruth's journal. The photograph itself was remarkably well preserved, suggesting it had been carefully maintained through generations. Maya's grandmother must have taken special care of it, understanding its value. Maya wondered if Loretta had known the full story, or if she had simply preserved what had been passed down to her with the understanding that it was important, even if the details had been lost to time. She called Derek again around 9 p.m. "Did you reach out to your contact?" "Yeah, he's interested. Very interested actually. Dr. Marcus Webb. I sent him the photos you forwarded to me, and he called me back within an hour. He said if this is what we think it is, it could be significant not just for our family but for understanding property rights and black land ownership during Reconstruction. He wants to meet tomorrow if you're available. He said he can make time regardless of his schedule because this is too important to delay." "Tomorrow works. What time?" "He said he could do lunch at 1, at that cafe near the university campus. The Blue Bicycle or something like that. I'll meet you there. I'm taking the afternoon off. This is more important than any work presentation." Maya agreed and hung up. She picked up the photograph again, studying each face with renewed intensity. Sarah, Moses, James, Ruth, Thomas, Elizabeth, and Samuel. 7 people who had survived enslavement, who had claimed their freedom and their dignity, who had been smart enough and brave enough to document their legal rights in a way that transcended time. 7 people who had refused to be erased from history. "I see you," Maya whispered to the image. "I see what you did. I see how carefully you planned this. And I'm going to make sure your story is told. I'm going to find out what happened to that land and to your family. I promise you that." The next morning, Maya woke early and drove to the Charleston County Public Library before her meeting with Dr. Webb. The building was an imposing brick structure downtown, with tall windows and marble steps that spoke of civic pride from an earlier era. Inside, the air conditioning was a blessed relief from the already oppressive morning heat. The reference librarian, an elderly white woman named Margaret with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck, greeted her warmly when Maya explained her research project. Reconstruction-era property records. Margaret adjusted her glasses and peered at Maya with interest. "We have some of that on microfilm, though a lot was destroyed in fires over the years, both accidental and, well, not so accidental. What specific property are you looking for?" Maya showed her the photograph and explained what she knew. Margaret's eyes widened as she studied the image, bringing it closer to her face and then holding it at arm's length to see it better. "This is extraordinary. 1868, and they owned property? That's rare. Not unheard of, but rare. Most freedmen worked as sharecroppers or laborers, trapped in cycles of debt that were barely better than slavery. To own land outright, and to have the resources to document it professionally like this with a photographer, suggests your family was exceptional. They must have been industrious and clever to acquire property so quickly after emancipation. They spent 2 hours going through records. Margaret helped Maya navigate the microfilm reader, a clunky machine that required careful threading of the film and precise focusing. They searched through deed registrations from 1865 to 1870, scrolling through page after page of cramped handwriting that was difficult to read, faded and spotted with age. The writing was in the ornate style of the era, with elaborate capital letters and abbreviations that took time to decipher. But Margaret was patient and experienced, having helped countless researchers navigate these records over her 30 years at the library. Finally, they found it. Richardson Moses. Purchase of land parcel, 40 acres, west of Charleston proper. Recorded October 15, 1868. Witnessed by... Margaret paused, squinting at the screen and adjusting the focus slightly. Witnessed by Thomas Caldwell, attorney, and Robert Henderson, photographer. Henderson, Maya breathed, her heart racing. That's the photographer mentioned in Ruth's journal. And Caldwell is the lawyer she wrote about, the one who helped them protect the deed. So they had the deed officially recorded with 2 witnesses, and then immediately had the photograph taken with the deed visible, Margaret said, understanding dawning on her face. That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. In that era, with so many black families having their property stolen through legal manipulation or violence or both, creating a photographic record was incredibly smart. If someone destroyed the courthouse records, which happened frequently, the photograph would still exist as evidence. And having the photographer himself as one of the witnesses creates an additional layer of documentation. Maya felt goosebumps rise on her arms despite the chilly air conditioning. Her ancestors hadn't just been lucky. They had been strategic, thinking several steps ahead, understanding the dangers they faced and taking every precaution possible. Where exactly was this land? Maya asked. Margaret pulled up a map of Charleston from 1870 and compared it with the property description in the deed. She marked a spot with her finger, leaving a slight smudge on the screen. Roughly here. Which today would be. She pulled out a modern map of Charleston from a drawer in her desk and spread it across the table. This would put it somewhere in the area between Morrison Drive and Meeting Street. That's quite close to downtown now. Very close actually. Maya's stomach tightened. That was prime real estate in modern Charleston, an area that had been heavily developed and redeveloped over the decades. I need to find out what happened to that property. Who owns it now? How it changed hands. Property tax records would show chain of ownership, Margaret said. But that's at the county assessor's office, not here. They might have it digitized in their online database, or you might need to look through physical records if you want to go back that far. I can give you the information for their research department. Ask for Helen Patterson. She's been there forever and knows those records inside and out. Maya thanked Margaret profusely and left the library with copies of everything they had found, including a printed screenshot of the deed registration that Margaret had helped her capture from the microfilm. She had just enough time to grab a coffee and a pastry from a nearby cafe before meeting Derek and Dr. Webb. She sat at a small table outside, drinking her coffee and watching Charleston wake up, tourists already starting to fill the historic district despite the early hour, taking photos of the antebellum architecture and horse-drawn carriages. The cafe near the university was crowded with students when Maya arrived at 12:45, groups clustered around tables with laptops and textbooks, the buzz of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine creating a lively atmosphere. Derek had secured a corner booth away from the main flow of traffic. He stood and waved when Maya entered. Next to him sat a black man in his 50s, with gray-flecked hair cut short and intelligent eyes behind round glasses. He wore a button-down shirt and khakis, a messenger bag beside him on the seat. Maya, this is Dr. Marcus Webb. Dr. Webb, my sister Maya Richardson. They shook hands, and Maya slid into the booth across from them. Dr. Webb leaned forward with barely contained excitement. his eyes bright with interest. "Your brother showed me the photos you sent him. May I see the original?" Maya carefully unwrapped the photograph from the protective cloth she had used. Dr. Webb put on a pair of white cotton gloves before accepting it, handling it with the reverence of someone who understood the value and fragility of historical artifacts. He studied it in silence for several minutes, occasionally taking out a jeweler's magnifying glass to examine details. Maya and Derek exchanged glances but remained quiet, letting the historian take his time. "Remarkable," Dr. Webb finally said, his voice soft with awe. "The composition, the clothing, the setting, everything suggests this is authentic. The photographer was skilled. The lighting is good, the focus is sharp, the poses are natural despite the formality. And you said there's a journal as well?" Maya produced Ruth's diary. Dr. Webb handled it with the same careful reverence, gently opening the cover and examining the pages. He read several passages, occasionally making soft sounds of amazement or nodding to himself. This is the kind of primary source historians dream about finding. First-person accounts from that period, especially from Black women, are extraordinarily rare. Most couldn't read or write yet, and those who could often didn't have the resources or safety to keep journals. This Ruth was clearly educated, and she was perceptive. Listen to this passage. He read aloud, "Today I saw a man struck down in the street for not stepping aside when a white woman passed. No one helped him. No one spoke against it. Father says we must be careful, must never give them an excuse. But how can we live free if we must walk so carefully?" This is powerful testimony about the reality of freedom in the immediate post-war period. The journal mentions she attended a school, Maya said, one that had just been established for Black children. That would have been one of the Freedmen's Bureau schools, Dr. Webb explained, setting the journal down carefully. After the war, Northern missionary societies and the Freedmen's Bureau established schools throughout the South. The hunger for education among formerly enslaved people was tremendous. Adults and children would walk miles to attend classes, often working all day and then studying at night. Your ancestor Ruth was taking advantage of those opportunities, and clearly she made the most of them. Her writing is sophisticated, her observations are sharp. She was an educated woman by any standard. He turned back to the photograph, focusing on the document visible on the wall. "Now, this is what fascinates me most. I've seen a few photographs from this era where families posed with Bibles or other significant objects, symbols of respectability and civilization in response to racist claims that Black people were savage or inferior. But I've never seen one where a property deed was deliberately included like this. Let me take some high-resolution scans. I have equipment in my lab that might be able to enhance the image enough to read what's on that document clearly." They finished lunch quickly, Maya barely tasting her sandwich, and headed to Dr. Webb's office at the university. His laboratory was filled with computers, scanners, cameras on tripods, and various pieces of equipment Maya didn't recognize. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books and archived materials. A large monitor displayed what looked like a historical map. The space felt like a combination of a photography studio and a history archive. Dr. Webb carefully placed the photograph on a specialized flatbed scanner, adjusting lights and settings with practiced precision. "This will take about 20 minutes to complete the scan," he explained as he worked. "The software will capture every detail at a resolution of 1200 dpi, which is high enough that we can zoom in significantly without losing clarity. We'll be able to see things in this photograph that aren't visible to the naked eye." While the scan processed, Dr. Webb asked Maya questions about what else she had found. She told him about the deed registration at the library, about the 40 acres, about the witnesses including the photographer and the lawyer. She showed him the copies Margaret had made. "That's a fascinating detail," Dr. Webb said, examining the documents. "Henderson witnessing the deed registration and then photographing the family. It suggests a relationship beyond just business. In that era, there were some white Northerners who came south and genuinely tried to help freedmen navigate the legal system. Henderson might have been one of those. Or he might have been a Black photographer himself. There were several in Charleston during that period, free blacks who had learned trades before the war or northern blacks who came south to document the community and create positive images that countered racist stereotypes. The computer beeped, and Dr. Webb turned to the monitor. The scanned image filled the screen in stunning detail. Every fiber of the paper was visible, every subtle gradation of tone and shadow. Maya gasped. The faces of her ancestors looked almost alive, their expressions clearer than she had ever seen. She could see the texture of the fabric in their clothes, the grain of the wooden wall behind them, individual strands of Sarah's hair. Dr. Webb zoomed in on the document on the wall. The text became legible, the handwriting clear and formal. Certificate of deed, he read aloud. Property conveyed to Moses Richardson, freedman, all right and title to 40 acres of land located. He squinted at the screen. West of Charleston proper, bounded on the north by. I can't quite make out all the boundary descriptions. Charleston County, South Carolina. Dated October 14, 1868. He zoomed in more. At the bottom of the deed, clearly visible now, was a seal and 2 signatures. The official county seal, Dr. Webb said quietly, his finger hovering near the screen without touching it. And these signatures. One is probably the county clerk. The other. He adjusted the zoom again, bringing the signature into sharp focus. Thomas Caldwell, attorney at law. The same one who witnessed the original deed registration at the courthouse. Derek, who had been watching over Dr. Webb's shoulder, whistled softly. So they had a lawyer, they had it officially recorded with witnesses, and they photographed it. They were making damn sure no one could take it away. They understood the system was against them and they were taking every possible precaution. Or that if someone did take it, there would be evidence of the theft, Dr. Webb said grimly. Because that happened constantly during this period. Black families would legally purchase land only to have white neighbors or officials use violence, fraud, or legal technicalities to steal it. Tax sales, forged deeds, intimidation, outright violence. Having this level of documentation was smart, but it didn't always prevent theft. It just meant there was a record of the crime, even if no one in power cared to prosecute it. Maya felt a chill run through her body. What do you think happened to this land? That's what we need to find out, Dr. Webb said, his expression serious. The county assessor's office will have records of property transfers. We can trace the chain of ownership from 1868 to today. Be prepared. The story might not have a happy ending. Most black families lost their Reconstruction-era land by the early 1900s, if not sooner. Through various mechanisms, legal and illegal, that wealth was systematically stripped away. They spent another hour at the university. Dr. Webb printed high-resolution copies of the enhanced photograph from multiple angles, capturing details that were invisible in the original. He also offered to help Maya with further research, providing her with his contact information and a list of other archives and resources that might be helpful. He asked permission to write about the photograph and journal for an academic publication, which Maya granted, feeling honored that her family's history might contribute to broader historical understanding and help tell the story of what happened to black land ownership after the Civil War. That afternoon, Maya and Derek went to the county assessor's office, a modern building that contrasted sharply with the historic architecture downtown. The clerk there was less enthusiastic than Margaret the librarian had been, clearly busy and slightly annoyed at being pulled away from her computer. But when Maya mentioned Helen Patterson, the woman's expression softened. Helen retired last year, but I can help you. What are you looking for? Maya explained and provided the property information. The clerk directed them to a computer terminal where they could access the property records database. Maya entered the information about the original parcel, and the computer began pulling up records, the screen flickering as it loaded historical data. The chain of ownership appeared on the screen in a simple list format. The property had remained in the Richardson family, with Moses Richardson as the registered owner, until 1903. Then it transferred to someone named Wallace Morton. Maya's heart sank. 35 years they had held on to it, and then it was gone. 1903. What happened then? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek was already pulling out his phone, searching for information about Wallace Morton and Charleston in that time period. His face darkened as he read, his jaw clenching. "Maya, look at this." He showed her a newspaper article from June 1903, found in a digitized archive. The headline read, "Negro Property Dispute Ends in Sale." The article, written in the casual racism typical of that era, described how a colored family had been forced to sell valuable property after falling behind on tax payments. Wallace Morton, described as a prominent businessman and civic leader, had purchased the land at public auction. The article made it sound like Morton had done the community a service by taking over property that had been neglected by its previous owners. "They lost it to tax foreclosure," Maya said, her voice hollow. "After holding on to it for 35 years, fighting for 35 years to keep it, they lost it to taxes." Derek kept reading, scrolling through more search results. It gets worse. Morton didn't even keep it long. He sold it 2 years later, in 1905, at a massive profit. The sale record shows he paid $200 at the tax auction and sold it for $3,500. It changed hands several more times over the next few decades, always increasing in value. Current owner is. He paused, his expression darkening further. Current owner is listed as Morton Properties LLC, part of a commercial development company. It looks like the family never really let go of it, just incorporated and maintained ownership through a company structure. Maya stared at the screen, a complex storm of emotions churning inside her. Her ancestors had fought so hard to own that land, had been so careful to protect it legally, and in the end it hadn't mattered. The system had found a way to take it anyway, and the family that had stolen it still benefited from that theft more than a century later. 40 acres in what's now downtown Charleston, Derek said quietly. "Do you have any idea what that would be worth today?" "Millions. Maybe tens of millions depending on exactly where it is and what's built on it." They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the fluorescent lights and the clicking of computer keyboards around them filling the void. Then Maya straightened her shoulders, feeling determination crystallize inside her. "I want to know more about that 1903 tax sale. I want to know if it was legal or if our family was cheated. I want to see the actual tax records, the notices that were supposedly sent, proof that the taxes were actually unpaid and not just recorded as such. And I want to know what happened to Sarah and Moses's children, to Ruth and her siblings. What happened to them after they lost the land? Where did they go? How did they survive?" Derek nodded. Dr. Webb could probably help with that research. He seemed really invested in this story. "There's something else," Maya said slowly, an idea forming. "That deed, the one in the photograph. Grandma kept it all these years, kept everything preserved so carefully. Which means she knew about this. She knew the family had owned that land and lost it. Why didn't she ever try to do anything about it? Why didn't she tell us more explicitly?" "Maybe she thought it was too late," Derek suggested. "Or maybe she didn't have the resources to fight a legal battle against a development company. Or maybe she was just preserving the story for us, waiting for the right time, for someone in the next generation to have the tools and ability to do something with this information." Maya thought about her grandmother, about the boxes in the attic, about the care with which these items had been preserved through generations. "She was waiting for someone to care enough to look," Maya said softly. "She was waiting for someone to ask the right questions. She was leaving breadcrumbs, hoping one of us would follow the trail." As they left the assessor's office, stepping back out into the humid Charleston afternoon, Maya felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about a photograph anymore. It was about justice delayed, about a debt that had never been paid. Her ancestors had done everything right, had followed every law, had protected their property with every legal means available, and still had their property stolen. And somewhere in Charleston, there was land that should have belonged to her family, that might have changed the trajectory of generations, providing wealth and stability and opportunities that were instead stripped away. That land had enriched people who had no right to it, building fortunes on theft that was never acknowledged, never addressed, never repaid. "What are you thinking?" Derek asked as they reached the car, his hand on the door handle. Maya looked at him, her jaw set with determination. "I'm thinking this story isn't over yet. I'm thinking it's time for the truth to come out." Over the next 2 weeks, Maya threw herself into research with an intensity that surprised even her. She took a leave of absence from her job as a marketing consultant in Atlanta, explaining to her boss that she had urgent family business in Charleston that couldn't wait. She rented a small apartment in Charleston's downtown area, a modest studio with a view of the historic district. Derek, caught up in the mystery and importance of what they were uncovering, arranged to work remotely so he could help, moving his laptop and files into Maya's apartment and setting up a makeshift office at the kitchen table. Dr. Webb became an invaluable ally, opening doors to archives and connecting them with other historians specializing in reconstruction, making introductions and phone calls that got them access to materials that would have otherwise taken months to navigate. They started with census records. The 1870 census showed Moses Richardson, age 45, listed as a landowner and farmer. His property value was listed at $1,000, a substantial sum. Sarah Richardson, age 42, listed as keeping house. The children were all there. James, 23, working as a farm laborer on the family land. Ruth, 21, listed as attending school. Thomas, 19, also working on the farm. And the twins Elizabeth and Samuel, both 12, listed as scholars, meaning they were attending school. The family was literate, property owning, and investing in education. They were beating the odds to be why the 1880 census. The family had grown. James had married a woman named Martha and had 2 children, both under 5. They lived on the Richardson property in a house separate from but adjacent to Moses and Sarah's home. Ruth had married a schoolteacher named Benjamin Davis. They also lived on the property, in another dwelling. The census showed 3 households on the 40 acres, all family members, creating a multi-generational compound. Everyone still lived together, pooling resources and labor. Thomas had learned carpentry and was listed as a skilled worker. The twins, now 22, were both married and still living on the land. Elizabeth worked as a seamstress. Samuel worked with Thomas in carpentry. The family had diversified their income, not depending solely on farming. The 1890 census showed more prosperity. Moses, now 65, was still listed as owning his property free and clear, meaning there was no mortgage or lien against it. The farm value was estimated at $2,000, double what it had been 20 years earlier. The city was expanding, growing westward, and the Richardson land, once on the rural outskirts, was becoming increasingly desirable as Charleston recovered from the war and began to modernize. All the children had remained in Charleston, unusual in an era when many black Southerners were beginning to migrate north seeking better opportunities. Several worked as skilled laborers. Ruth's husband Benjamin worked as a teacher at one of the black schools. They had created a stable, multi-generational household that represented the dream of Reconstruction, formerly enslaved people building wealth and passing it to the next generation. Then came 1900. Moses was 75. Sarah had passed away 2 years earlier, her death recorded in the city register. Moses still owned the property, now valued at $3,000. The expansion of Charleston continued. Streetcar lines were being extended into previously rural areas. The Richardson land was no longer farmland on the outskirts, but was becoming part of the developing city. Real estate speculators were active in the area, buying up properties and subdividing them for residential and commercial development. And then 1903. The year everything fell apart. Maya and Derek found the actual tax records from that year in the Charleston County Archives, housed in a temperature-controlled room in the basement of the courthouse. The Richardson family had owed $87 in property taxes for the year 1902, due by March of 1903. In today's money, accounting for more than a century of inflation, that would be roughly equivalent to $2,500. Not a small sum, but not impossible either for a property-owning family that had multiple income sources. The taxes had gone unpaid, according to the records. The county had seized the property in May 1903 and sold it at public auction in June. Wallace Morton had purchased it for $200, less than 1/10 of its assessed value of $3,000. "This doesn't make sense," Maya said, spreading documents across the table in the archives reading room. "They owned the land for 35 years and never had problems with taxes. The records show they paid every year from 1868 through 1901. Their taxes were always paid on time, sometimes even early. Why would they suddenly stop paying in 1903? What changed? Dr. Webb, who had joined them for this research session, bringing with him a stack of reference books and his own research notes, frowned at the documents. "Let me show you something." He pulled out a book he had brought, a historical study of black land loss in the South published by Duke University Press. He flipped to a chapter titled Mechanisms of Dispossession. "What you're seeing here is a common pattern," he explained, adjusting his glasses and running his finger down the page as he read. "As formerly enslaved people managed to acquire property, and as that property increased in value due to urban expansion or agricultural productivity, white business interests found ways to take it. Tax sales were one of the most common methods. Here's how it typically worked. Tax assessments would suddenly and dramatically increase on black-owned property, sometimes doubling or tripling overnight. Or tax bills wouldn't be properly delivered, sent to incorrect addresses or held at the post office without notification. Or they'd be delivered but payment wouldn't be properly recorded even if the owner had paid. Maybe the receipt would be lost, or the payment would be credited to the wrong account. Then the property would be declared delinquent and sold at auction, usually to a white buyer who had been tipped off in advance about the sale date and time. Black property owners often didn't receive notice of the auction or received it too late to do anything about it. By the time they learned their land had been sold, it was too late to contest it. So they might have actually paid the taxes, but it was recorded as unpaid." Derek asked, his voice tight with anger. "Doctor." Webb nodded gravely. "It's impossible to prove now, without seeing the actual tax notices and payment records, which probably don't exist anymore or were never properly kept in the first place. But yes, that was extremely common. Or the tax assessment might have been deliberately inflated to a point the family couldn't afford. Look at this." He pulled out another document he had found in his own research, a table showing property tax assessments in Charleston in the early 1900s. Black-owned properties were frequently assessed at values much higher than comparable white-owned properties. It was a way to force sales without explicitly using race-based laws, which were becoming more difficult to defend in court. You make the taxes so high the family can't pay, then you take the land legally. Maya felt anger building in her chest, hot and sharp. So even though they did everything right, even though they had the deed properly recorded, even though they had photographic evidence of their ownership, even though they paid their taxes faithfully for 35 years, it didn't matter. The system was rigged against them. They were set up to fail. "I'm afraid that's exactly what happened to thousands of black families during that era," Dr. Webb said quietly, his expression sad. Conservative estimates suggest that black Americans lost 16 million acres of land between 1870 and the 1960s, land worth hundreds of billions in today's dollars. 16 million acres. Think about that. It was stolen through various legal and illegal means. Tax sales, forged deeds, violence, intimidation, fraudulent debt claims, partition sales where white relatives or neighbors could force the sale of commonly owned land. Your family's story is heartbreaking, but it's not unique. It's representative of a massive theft that shaped the racial wealth gap we still see today. Maya stared at the photograph of her ancestors that she had brought with her, at Moses and Sarah's dignified faces, at the deed they had so carefully included in the image. They had known this might happen. That's why they had been so careful with documentation. But even their careful planning hadn't been enough to protect them from a system designed to dispossess them. "What happened to them after they lost the land?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They searched through city directories and death records, piecing together what they could. Moses Richardson had died in 1906 at age 81, just 3 years after losing the land that had been the foundation of his family's stability. His obituary, which they found in the Charleston Messenger, a black-owned newspaper from that era, described him as a respected member of the community and property owner, even though he no longer owned the land at the time of his death. The obituary writer either didn't know about the loss or chose to remember Moses as he had been for most of his adult life. His children had scattered after losing the property. Without the land to keep them together, without the multi-generational compound that had supported them all, they had to find other ways to survive. James had moved to Philadelphia, finding work in a steel mill. Thomas had moved to New York, continuing his carpentry work there. The twins had gone to different cities, Elizabeth to Atlanta, Samuel to Washington, D.C. Ruth had stayed in Charleston, and it was through her line that Maya and Derek descended. Ruth had continued teaching until her death in 1937. The journal Maya had found in the attic was just one of several Ruth had kept throughout her life. Maya contacted the Charleston Black History Coalition to see if their archives would be interested in acquiring the journals and having them properly preserved and digitized for researchers. The archivist she spoke with was ecstatic, saying Ruth's journals would be an invaluable primary source. One afternoon, while Derek was cross-referencing property transfer records, Maya decided to actually visit the site where the Richardson land had been. Using the old property descriptions and modern GPS coordinates that Dr. Webb had helped her calculate, she drove to what had once been her family's 40 acres. The drive took only 15 minutes from her apartment, a route that took her through historic neighborhoods and then into a more commercial area. What she found made her throat tighten with emotion. It was a large commercial development. A shopping center with a parking garage, several chain stores including a Target and a Home Depot, a few chain restaurants including an Olive Garden and a Chipotle. Nothing remained of what had once been farmland. No marker, no sign, no indication whatsoever that this place had once represented the dreams and dignity of a black family newly freed from bondage. Just asphalt and concrete and generic corporate architecture. Maya stood in the parking lot, cars pulling in and out around her, people hurrying to shop or eat, completely oblivious to the history beneath their feet. She tried to imagine it as it had been. She pictured a wooden house, well-maintained with a porch where the family could sit in the evenings. Fields planted with crops, maybe corn and vegetables. A garden where Sarah grew herbs and flowers. Children playing in the yard. Moses and Sarah working side by side to build something lasting. All of it erased. Paved over. Forgotten as if it had never existed. She pulled out her phone and called Derek, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm at the site. It's a shopping center. A damn shopping center. Target and Olive Garden and a parking garage. Nothing left. Nothing at all." "I figured it would be something like that," Derek said, his voice heavy with understanding. "Most of that area has been completely redeveloped over the decades. Progress, they call it. I feel like I should do something. Put up a sign or a memorial or something. These people shouldn't be forgotten. This place shouldn't be just another anonymous shopping center. It should mean something." "Maybe there is something we can do," Derek said slowly, and she could hear the thoughtfulness in his tone. "I've been thinking about this. We can't get the land back. That's pretty much impossible. The legal barriers are insurmountable, and even if we could prove the tax sale was fraudulent, the statute of limitations expired decades ago. But we can tell the story. Dr. Webb wants to publish an article in a major history journal. You could write a book. We could create a documentary. The photograph, the journals, all the research we've done, the story of what happened, it's powerful. It matters. It needs to be told so this doesn't keep being forgotten." Maya looked around at the shopping center, at the people walking in and out of stores carrying shopping bags, at the cars circling to find parking spaces, oblivious to the history beneath their feet. "That doesn't feel like enough." "It's not about enough," Derek said gently. "It's about what's possible. Grandma saved these documents for a reason. She wanted us to know our history. She wanted this story to survive. Maybe that's the victory. Not getting the land back, but making sure Moses and Sarah and Ruth and all of them aren't forgotten. Making sure their story is told. Making sure people understand what happened and why it matters. That's how we honor them." That evening, Maya returned to her rental apartment and laid out everything they had gathered on the floor, creating a timeline that stretched across the hardwood. The original photograph, now safely stored in an archival sleeve. High-resolution digital copies. Ruth's journals, multiple volumes spanning decades. Copies of deed records, census data, tax documents, newspaper articles. The map showing the original property boundaries superimposed over a modern map of Charleston. It was a comprehensive documentation of both achievement and injustice, a visual representation of one family's experience that stood in for thousands of similar stories. Her phone rang. It was Dr. Webb. "Maya, I've been doing some additional research on Wallace Morton, the man who bought your family's land at the tax sale. I thought you should know what I found." And he was an interesting character, and by interesting I mean deeply problematic. A businessman with connections to the Democratic Party machine that controlled South Carolina politics during that era. Ben Tillman's political machine, if you're familiar with him. One of the most virulent racists in American political history. Morton made a fortune buying up properties that had belonged to black families and reselling them at large profits. He wasn't unique in this, but he was particularly successful at it. I found records showing he acquired at least 30 properties through tax sales between 1900 and 1915, almost all of them previously owned by black families. He died wealthy in 1938. The obituary in the Charleston News and Courier describes him as a civic leader and successful businessman. No mention of how he actually made his money. His descendants still have money in Charleston, still prominent in business and social circles. Maya felt a bitter taste in her mouth. So he built his fortune by stealing from families like mine, and he was celebrated for it. Essentially this. The system enabled it, even encouraged it. Morton was just one of many who took advantage. He was doing what was considered smart business in that era, buying low and selling high. That the buying low involved taking land from black families who had been deliberately set up to fail wasn't considered a moral problem by white society at the time. What about the current owner? Morton Properties, LLC. I looked into that too. It's a real estate development company founded in the 1980s by Wallace Morton's grandson, Wallace Morton III. Named after the family, run by Wallace Morton's great-grandson now, Wallace Morton IV. They own several commercial properties in Charleston and throughout the region. The shopping center where your family's land was is one of their holdings, but not their only one. They're a multi-million-dollar company, built on a foundation of theft that was never acknowledged. An idea was forming in Maya's mind, crystallizing into something concrete. Do you think they know the history of that land? Do they know how their ancestor acquired it? Do they know they're profiting from something that was stolen? Probably not the full story, Dr. Webb said. Most people don't dig into their family history that deeply, especially when it might reveal uncomfortable truths. And even if they did, there's no legal obligation to acknowledge it or do anything about it. Property rights in America heavily favor current ownership, regardless of how unjustly that property was originally acquired. The law protects present possession, not historical justice. But morally, Maya pressed. Morally there's an obligation, isn't there? Morally is a different question. Some families, when confronted with the history of how their wealth was built, choose to make amends in various ways. Donations, acknowledgments, support for descendant communities. Others don't. They say it was a different time, they weren't responsible for their ancestors' actions, it's all in the past. It's impossible to predict how any particular family will respond. After hanging up, Maya sat in silence for a long time, staring at the timeline on her floor. She thought about her grandmother, about the careful way Loretta had preserved these documents through decades, through moves and floods and fires, always keeping them safe. She thought about Moses and Sarah, about the pride in their faces in that photograph, about the deed they had positioned so carefully on the wall. She thought about Ruth, diligently recording her family's story in her journal, documenting not just events but emotions and hopes and fears. They had wanted to be remembered. They had wanted their achievement documented. They had wanted future generations to know what they had built. And yes, they had lost the land, lost the material wealth they had worked so hard to create. But they hadn't lost their dignity or their story. That had survived, waiting in an attic for someone to find it and ask questions and refuse to let it be forgotten. Maya opened her laptop and began to write. Not a legal claim, which would go nowhere and accomplish nothing. Not an angry letter to Morton Properties, which would likely be ignored or dismissed. But a comprehensive account of her family's history. A narrative that wove together the documents, the photograph, the research, the context of Reconstruction and Jim Crow and systematic dispossession. A story that was particular to the Richardson family but representative of thousands of similar stories that had been lost or forgotten or deliberately suppressed. She wrote through the night, words pouring out faster than she could type, her fingers flying across the keyboard. By morning, she had 30 pages. It was raw and needed editing, but the bones of the story were there, the structure solid. Derek came by around 9, carrying coffee and breakfast sandwiches. He read what she had written, nodding occasionally, making notes in the margins. "This is good, Maya. Really good. You're honoring them. Telling the truth without being sensational. It's powerful." "I'm thinking bigger than just an article or a book," Maya said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I want to create something permanent. An exhibition maybe, or a multimedia project. The photograph should be seen by thousands of people, not just sitting in my grandmother's attic or in an archive. Ruth's journals should be read. This history should be taught in schools. People need to understand how the wealth gap was created, how it was deliberate, how it continues to shape our society. That takes funding," Derek pointed out practically, "and institutional support. Then we find it. We apply for grants from foundations that support historical research and public history. We approach museums and historical societies. Dr. Webb can help connect us with the right people. There's a whole network of scholars and institutions working on these issues. We need to plug into that network." Derek smiled. "You've really committed to this, haven't you? This has become your mission." Maya looked at the photograph of her ancestors, now the centerpiece of her timeline on the floor. "How can I not? They survived slavery. They bought land when it was nearly impossible for black people to do so. They protected their legal rights as best they could. They raised their children to be educated and skilled. They built something from nothing. They did everything right, everything society tells us we should do to succeed, and it was still taken from them. The least I can do is make sure people know what they accomplished and what was stolen. The least I can do is refuse to let them be forgotten." "Grandma would be proud," Derek said softly. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "I hope so. I really hope so. I wish I could tell her I finally understand what she was trying to preserve. I wish I had paid more attention when she told her stories." 3 months later, Maya stood in the Charleston Community Center's main hall, surrounded by people who had come to the opening of her exhibition. The transformation of the space was remarkable. The walls were covered with enlarged versions of the Richardson family photograph, alongside reproductions of Ruth's journal entries, carefully selected to tell the story. Historical documents, maps showing the property boundaries then and now, and contextual information about Reconstruction and black land ownership filled the space. Timeline displays showed the economic impact of land loss on black communities. Comparative statistics illustrated the racial wealth gap and traced its roots to systematic dispossession. In the center of the main room, protected behind climate-controlled glass on a custom-built pedestal, was the original photograph. Lighting had been carefully positioned to minimize glare while allowing visitors to see every detail. Next to it, opened to a significant page, was one of Ruth's journals, also in protective glass. Dr. Webb had helped her secure grant funding for proper conservation and display from the National Endowment for the Humanities and several private foundations focused on African American history. The exhibition was titled 40 Acres and a Photograph: The Richardson Family and the Price of Freedom. The subtitle read, "One Family's Story of Achievement, Loss, and Resilience During Reconstruction and Beyond." The turnout was larger than Maya had expected, larger than she had dared to hope. The community center's main hall, which could hold 200 people, was packed. Historians and academics from universities throughout the region. Community members, both black and white, young and old. Journalists from local and regional newspapers and television stations. Students from nearby colleges who had heard about the exhibition through their professors. And several of her own relatives who had driven in from other states, cousins she had reconnected with through this project who had their own family stories to share. Derek stood beside her near the entrance, greeting people as they entered, handing out programs that contained essays by Dr. Webb and other historians providing context for the Richardson family story. He looked proud, his usually casual demeanor replaced by a formal suit and a seriousness that showed how much this meant to him. "I still can't believe you pulled this together so fast," he said during a brief lull. 3 months from finding the photograph to mounting a full exhibition with professional design and lighting and everything. Dr. Webb helped tremendously, Maya said, watching as people moved through the space, stopping to read text panels, leaning close to examine documents. And once I reached out to the Charleston Black History Coalition, they were enthusiastic about hosting it. They said this is exactly the kind of local history that needs to be preserved and shared, that too often we focus on big national figures and forget about ordinary families whose experiences were just as important. An elderly black woman approached, leaning on a cane, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She moved slowly but with purpose, her eyes sharp and alert. "Are you Maya Richardson?" "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Dorothy Henderson. My great-grandfather was Robert Henderson, the photographer who took this picture." She gestured toward the central display. Maya's eyes widened in amazement. "Really? Oh my goodness. I've wanted to learn more about him. I tried to find information, but there's very little in the archives." Dorothy smiled, her face crinkling with pleasure. "When I saw the article in the paper about this exhibition, I knew I had to come. I've been preserving Robert's legacy in my own way. He was a free black man who learned photography in Philadelphia and came to Charleston after the war. He believed it was important to document the community, to show black people as dignified human beings instead of the caricatures white society promoted. He took hundreds of photographs during Reconstruction, portraits of families, workers, children, churches, schools. Most are lost now, destroyed or scattered or moldering in attics where no one knows their value. But I have a few preserved, maybe 20 photographs total. Your family's photograph is one of his finest works, technically and artistically. Would you be willing to share your family's story?" Maya asked eagerly. "I'm planning to expand this project into a book, and it would be wonderful to include information about the photographer, about his life and his work and his vision." "I'd be honored," Dorothy said. "Robert's story deserves to be told too. He was part of this community, part of this moment in history when black people were trying to create new identities as free citizens. Photography was one tool in that effort." As the evening progressed, as the light outside faded and the community center's interior lights created a warm glow, Maya gave a short talk about the research process and what she had learned. She stood at a podium that had been set up near the central display, speaking into a microphone that carried her voice throughout the hall. She displayed the enhanced image that showed the deed clearly visible on the wall. She read passages from Ruth's journal, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. She explained the tax sale and how the land had been taken, using the documents and maps to illustrate. She talked about how this one family's story represented a much larger pattern of dispossession that affected thousands of families and created lasting economic inequality. Several people had tears in their eyes by the time she finished. A few elderly black women in the front row nodded in recognition, clearly connecting the story to their own family histories. During the question and answer session, hands shot up throughout the room. Maya fielded questions about her research methods, about Ruth's journals, about what had happened to the other family members. Then a hand in the back rose, and the crowd parted slightly as a young white man stood up. "I'm Brad Morton," he said, and the room went quiet, the energy shifting palpably. Conversations stopped. People turned to look at Maya's heart began to pound, adrenaline surging through her system. She hadn't expected this, hadn't even considered that someone from the Morton family might attend. "I'm the current CEO of Morton Properties," Brad continued, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent room. "I saw the publicity about this exhibition in the newspaper, and I felt I needed to come. I also felt I needed to do some research into my own family's history, which frankly I had never done in depth before." He stood up, and Maya could see he was uncomfortable, his hands clenched at his sides, his face flushed. He appeared to be in his early 40s, dressed in business casual clothes, looking like someone who had come directly from an office. "I didn't know the full story of how my great-great-grandfather acquired the property where our shopping center now stands. I knew vaguely that he had bought land early in the 1900s and that it had become valuable, but I had never questioned the details. After seeing the initial news coverage of this exhibition, I spent the last few weeks going through old family documents and business records stored in our company archives. What I found was disturbing. Wallace Morton kept detailed ledgers, and it's clear from his own records that he deliberately targeted black-owned properties, used his political connections to manipulate tax assessments and sales, and profited enormously from what can only be called theft. His ledgers literally list Negro property acquisitions as a category of business investment. The room was silent, everyone frozen, waiting to see where this was going. Brad Morton continued, his voice steady but emotional, clearly struggling with what he was revealing. I can't undo the past. I can't give back land that's been developed and redeveloped over more than a century, that now has buildings and infrastructure worth millions of dollars. But I can acknowledge the truth. My family's wealth was built in part on injustice. My privilege, my opportunities, the company I now run, all of it traces back to land that was stolen. And I can try to make amends, imperfect as that might be. He turned to face Maya directly. I'd like to make a substantial donation to establish an endowment fund in honor of the Richardson family. The fund would support education and economic development in the Black community in Charleston, specifically focusing on homeownership and small business development, addressing the very things that were taken from your family and others. I'm thinking initially of a $1 million endowment, with annual contributions to grow it over time. I'm also willing to work with the Historical Society to place a permanent historical marker at the shopping center site, acknowledging its history and the Richardson family's ownership and the circumstances of how it was lost. And I'd like to fund the expansion of this exhibition so it can travel to other cities and reach a wider audience, to help tell this story that needs to be told. Maya was speechless, her prepared remarks forgotten. Derek squeezed her shoulders supportively from where he stood beside the podium. Finally, Maya found her voice, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Mr. Morton, I don't know what to say. This is unexpected and genuinely meaningful. It doesn't erase what happened, but acknowledgement matters. Truth matters. And yes, material support matters too, because the effects of that theft are still felt today in my community. It's the right thing to do, Brad said simply. I can't speak for my entire family, and I know some of them will think I'm wrong to acknowledge this. But I can speak for myself and for my company. We have a responsibility to acknowledge historical wrongs and try to contribute to healing, even if imperfectly, even if we can never fully repair the damage. I want my children to grow up in a world that faces truth rather than hiding from it. After the formal program ended, people mingled, examining the exhibits more closely, sharing their own family stories of land loss and resilience. A reception area had been set up with refreshments. Conversations buzzed throughout the space. Dorothy Henderson and Brad Morton had a long conversation, Dorothy providing more historical context about the era, about her great-grandfather's work documenting the community. Brad listened intently, asking questions, clearly trying to understand the full scope of the history his family had been part of. Dr. Webb approached Maya with a broad smile. This is remarkable. You've created something important here. Not just an exhibition, but a moment of truth-telling and accountability. That doesn't happen often. You should be very proud. I never imagined it would lead to this, Maya admitted, still processing Brad Morton's presence and his offer. When I found that photograph in Grandma's attic, I just wanted to understand my family's history. I wanted to know who they were, what they accomplished. I didn't expect it to become all of this. That's how it always starts, Dr. Webb said. One person curious enough to ask questions and brave enough to pursue answers. One person who refuses to let the past stay buried. Your grandmother would be very proud of what you've done here. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, exchanging contact information and promising to stay in touch, Maya stood alone for a moment in front of the original photograph. She looked at Moses and Sarah, at Ruth and her siblings, at the deed visible on the wall behind them. They had tried so hard to protect what they built. They had used every tool available to them. Photography, legal documentation, careful record-keeping, witnesses, multiple copies. And in the end, it hadn't been enough to save the land, but it had been enough to preserve the truth. And now, more than 150 years later, that truth was being acknowledged, was being seen and honored by hundreds of people. Their story was being told. "Thank you," Maya whispered to the faces in the photograph. "Thank you for being smart enough to document this. Thank you for believing that future generations would care. Thank you for making me part of this legacy. Thank you for not giving up, even when everything was stacked against you." Derek came up beside her. "Ready to go?" "In a minute." Maya pulled out her phone and opened the voice recorder app. She had been conducting oral history interviews with older relatives, gathering their memories and stories, creating a digital archive to complement the physical exhibition. "I want to record something while it's fresh in my mind. For the book, for the archive, for the future." She pressed record and spoke clearly, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. November 15th, 2025. Tonight we open the exhibition about the Richardson family and their land. We've told their story to hundreds of people. We've had it acknowledged publicly. Brad Morton, the descendant of the man who bought our family's land at the unjust tax sale, came and pledged to make amends in concrete ways. It's not perfect justice. It can't undo what was done. It can't give back the generations of wealth that should have been. But it's something. It's recognition. It's acknowledgement. It's a start toward repair. She paused, gathering her thoughts, looking at the photograph. Grandma used to say that the past isn't really past, that it lives in us and shapes us whether we acknowledge it or not. I understand now what she meant. Moses and Sarah and Ruth, they're not just names in old records or faces in a photograph. They're part of who I am. Their struggle, their achievement, their loss, it all matters. It shaped the opportunities my grandmother had and didn't have. It shaped the choices my parents made. It shapes who Derek and I are today, shapes the resources we have or don't have, shapes the obstacles we face. Finding that photograph changed me. Not just because of what I learned about my family's history, but because of what it taught me about resilience and dignity and the importance of documentation and truth. My ancestors knew their achievements might be stolen, but they made sure there was a record. They made sure we could find our way back to them. They refused to be erased. And now it's my responsibility to carry that forward. To tell this story. To make sure the next generation knows where we came from and what we've survived and what was taken from us. To make sure Moses and Sarah and Ruth and all the others aren't forgotten. To make sure their story becomes part of the larger story we tell about American history, about Reconstruction, about the racial wealth gap, about how the present was shaped by the past. She stopped recording and looked at Derek. "Now I'm ready to go." As they walked out into the Charleston night, the historic district lit up with streetlights and tourists still strolling the sidewalks despite the late hour, Maya felt a deep sense of peace. She had come to this city 3 months ago to clean out her grandmother's attic, expecting a difficult but straightforward task of sorting through the accumulation of a lifetime. Instead, she had found a mission, a purpose, a connection to her ancestors that bridged more than a century and a half and gave meaning to her own life in ways she couldn't have anticipated. The photograph that Moses and Sarah Richardson had commissioned in 1868, with that deed deliberately displayed on the wall behind them, had done exactly what they intended. It had preserved the truth. It had provided evidence. It had been a message to the future, a refusal to be forgotten. And finally, someone had received that message and acted on it. Over the following months, Maya's project expanded in ways she hadn't imagined. The exhibition traveled to museums in Atlanta, Columbia, Washington, D.C., and New York, reaching thousands of people at each location. Her book proposal, which combined her family's story with broader context about Black land loss during Reconstruction and beyond, attracted multiple publishers. She signed with Duke University Press, who saw the academic and popular potential. The book would be released the following year. She was invited to speak at universities and conferences throughout the country, sharing her family's story and the research methodology she had used. She appeared on several podcasts and was interviewed for a national public radio series on the racial wealth gap. The story resonated with people who had their own family histories of loss and dispossession. The endowment that Brad Morton established began funding scholarships and small business grants for Black entrepreneurs in Charleston. The first recipients were announced at a ceremony that both Maya and Brad attended, standing together on stage in a moment that some found moving and others found insufficient, but that represented a step toward acknowledgement. The historical marker was installed at the shopping center, and Morton Properties worked with the community to create a small memorial park on part of the property, with benches and plaques telling the story of the Richardson family and other black landowners whose property had been taken during the same era. It wasn't the land returned, but it was remembrance made visible. Ruth's journals were professionally conserved and digitized by the Charleston Black History Coalition's archive. They were now available to researchers and the public through the coalition's website, with careful annotations providing historical context. Graduate students began using them for dissertations. High school teachers incorporated excerpts into their curriculum. Descendants of other families who had lost land during the same era reached out to Maya after seeing the exhibition or reading articles about her work. They shared their own stories, their own photographs and documents. Maya began helping them research and document their histories as well, creating a network of descendant families working to reclaim their narratives if not their property. Dorothy Henderson became a friend and collaborator, providing historical photographs from her great-grandfather's work and historical context about the Black community in Charleston during Reconstruction. Together, they planned a larger project documenting the community through Robert Henderson's surviving photographs, creating a visual archive of a moment in history when Black Southerners were building new lives in freedom. And through it all, that photograph remained at the center. 7 people, dressed in their finest, looking directly at the camera with dignity and determination. And behind them, deliberately visible, proof of what they had achieved and what they had to lose. A document that had survived when the land itself was stolen, carrying truth across generations. 1 year after finding the photograph, Maya returned to Charleston for an anniversary commemoration. The exhibition had returned to the community center, expanded now with new research and stories from other families, creating a broader narrative about Black land ownership and loss in the South. The event drew even more people than the opening had, filling the space beyond capacity. Maya stood at the microphone, looking out at the crowd. Her family was there, including cousins she had reconnected with through this project, relatives she hadn't seen in years but who now felt bound together by shared history. Dr. Webb and Dorothy Henderson sat in the front row. Brad Morton was there with several other members of the Morton family who had joined his effort at acknowledgement and restitution, including his teenage children who were learning their family's complicated history. "A year ago, I found a photograph in my grandmother's attic," Maya began. "I didn't know then what it would lead to. I didn't know it would change my life and reconnect me with my history in such a profound way. I didn't know it would lead to all of this, to this community of people committed to remembering and honoring and telling the truth." That photograph showed my ancestors, Moses and Sarah Richardson, and their children, in 1868. And it showed something else. A deed. A piece of paper that represented their freedom, their property, their future, their hopes for generations to come. They made sure that deed was visible in the photograph because they knew how fragile their gains were. They knew that in a society still hostile to Black success, still resentful of Black freedom, documentation was protection. They were right to be cautious. The land was taken from them 35 years later through a manipulated tax sale, one of thousands of such thefts that happened throughout the South. But the photograph survived. The truth survived. Ruth's journals survived, carefully preserved and passed down through generations. And now, more than 150 years later, we're honoring what they achieved and acknowledging what was stolen. This project has taught me that justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied. It can mean justice transformed. We can't give back what was taken. We can't erase the hardship that loss caused for generations, the poverty and limited opportunities and truncated dreams. But we can tell the truth. We can honor our ancestors. We can learn from their resilience and their intelligence. And we can commit to building a more just future where truth is acknowledged and where historical wrongs are at least recognized even if they can't be fully repaired. Moses and Sarah Richardson bought 40 acres of land in 1868. They lost it in 1903. But what they didn't lose was their dignity, their family, their story, their determination to be remembered. That lives on. In this photograph. In Ruth's journals. In the memories passed down through generations. And now, in this public acknowledgement of what they achieved and what happened to them and why it matters. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about this history. Thank you for helping to ensure that my ancestors, and the thousands of families whose stories are similar, are not forgotten. Thank you for being part of this movement toward truth and toward justice, however imperfect and incomplete. The room erupted in applause that lasted several minutes. After the formal program, Maya stood again in front of the photograph, but this time she wasn't alone. Dozens of people gathered around, looking at the faces of Moses and Sarah and their children, reading the contextual information, discussing the implications, asking questions about how to research their own family histories. That a young black girl, maybe 10 years old with neat braids and curious eyes, tugged on Maya's sleeve. "Ma'am? Is that really your family?" "Yes, it is." "They owned land?" "Black people owned land back then." "They did. 40 acres. And thousands of other black families owned land too. My family wasn't unique in that achievement, though they were smart about how they protected it." "That's cool. My teacher says black people didn't get to own stuff back then, that they were all poor." "Some were poor, and life was very hard for everyone who had been enslaved," Maya said, crouching down to the girl's level so they could talk face to face. "But some managed to buy land or start businesses. They worked incredibly hard and were very smart about it. Your ancestors might have owned land too. You should ask your grandparents about your family's history. There might be old documents or photographs in someone's attic waiting to be found." The girl nodded seriously, her eyes bright with new understanding, then went back to studying the photograph with her mother, asking questions and pointing at details. Maya stood up and found herself smiling. This was why it mattered. Not just for academic or historical purposes, though those were important, but for that little girl to know that her ancestors had been more than victims, that they had achieved things, that they had fought for their families and their future with intelligence and courage, that they had owned land and built businesses and sent their children to school, that they had been full human beings with agency and dignity. That night, back in her hotel room, Maya video called Derek, who hadn't been able to make it down for the anniversary event because of a work commitment he couldn't reschedule. "How did it go?" "It was perfect. The turnout was huge. That little girl I told you about last week, the one whose family just discovered they also had relatives who owned land during Reconstruction, her grandmother came and brought old documents, including what looks like a property deed from 1872. We're going to help them research their family history too, trace what happened to their property." Derek smiled, his pride evident through the screen. "You've started something bigger than just our family's story. That was always the point, wasn't it? Our story matters because it connects to all the other stories. Because it's part of understanding what happened to black families in the South, how wealth was systematically stripped away, how that affects communities even today, how the past shapes the present. Individual stories create the larger pattern." "Grandma knew," Derek said softly. "That's why she kept everything so carefully. She understood that these weren't just personal mementos. They were historical documents. She was creating a foundation for someone to build on, leaving tools for us to use." "I miss her," Maya admitted, feeling the familiar ache of loss. "I wish she could see this. I wish I could tell her I finally understand why those boxes in the attic mattered so much. I wish I had listened better when she tried to tell me stories." "I think she knows," Derek said. "Somehow, I think she knows. And I think she's proud of what you've done, how you've honored the family." After hanging up, Maya sat at the desk and opened her laptop. She was working on a follow-up book, this one focused on present-day efforts to address historical land theft and the complicated questions of restitution and repair. The issues were thorny, with no easy answers, but they were important conversations that needed to happen. How do you repair a theft that happened generations ago? How do you calculate what is owed? Who should pay and who should receive? These were questions without perfect answers, but they needed to be asked. Before starting work, she opened the photograph on her screen, the high-resolution digital version that showed every detail. She had looked at it hundreds of times now, but it still moved her, still made her heart beat faster. Those faces. That deed on the wall. The deliberate act of documentation. The refusal to be forgotten. "We heard you," she said to the image, as she had many times before. "We heard your message across time. We heard what you were trying to tell us. And we're making sure it matters. We're making sure you're remembered. We're making sure your story is told and understood and honored. We're continuing what you started." Maya started to type, weaving together history and contemporary analysis, personal story and broader social context, individual experience and structural understanding. Outside her window, Charleston continued its evening routine, tourists and residents moving through streets that held layers of history beneath their surfaces. And in a climate-controlled archive at the community center, a photograph from 1868 remained carefully preserved, testament to a family's achievement, symbol of resilience, and proof that even when justice fails, truth can survive. The past was not truly past. It lived in the present, shaping opportunities and obstacles, creating inequalities that persisted across generations. But the past could also inspire, could teach, could connect people to something larger than themselves. Moses and Sarah Richardson had built something that endured, not the physical land but something more lasting. A story of dignity and determination that would be told as long as people cared about truth and justice.